Welcome, Kevin from Bitglass, your senior product marketing manager, I believe.
I am actually the vice president of marketing, so I run
Vice
marketing.
president. I'm sorry about that. So, can you tell us a bit, by means of introduction, a little bit about Bitglass and what Bitglass is doing?
Yeah, so we participate in what's called the Secure Access Service Edge, or pronounced SASE. And so it's a fast-forming market that takes into combination several different feature and functional sets, which will include CASB, Secure Web Gateway, and then Zero Trust Network Access, to name a few components that tend to be part of a SASE architecture.
Okay, and you have now published a report which looks into the sort of, well, it's not a new hype and not a new trend, but I believe ever since smartphones became more popular, a lot of employees are bringing their own devices to work. And this so-called, or sometimes called shadow IT, is definitely major security implication in some way. And what did you find out in your report on bring your own device?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that we found that was interesting, it's funny, we actually planned to do this report well before COVID-19 and all of the restrictions on movement. So, we actually found that the expected results in some regards shifted between our original intent back in like February or March, and when the report was then released earlier this summer. Because, probably a good undertone and an important undertone is the impact of the remote workforce. Because before, when you had BYOD as something that you can manage more so as an exception, today it is actually the norm. And it ultimately impacts the way people control it, because you saw, yeah, there's a couple of companies that were really mature before that really was thoughtful about how you handled BYOD and thinking about the right groups that could access or use your personal device, or you could use what scenarios you could use them in. But for the most part, people were accessing them as by exception. So, oh, that person wants to bring his or her mobile device, or that person wants to use his or her tablet, or there's all sorts of different scenarios that will come off on a one-off basis. You could evaluate everything kind of independently on its own. What you're starting to see with the current scenario is like, well, in truth, everybody requires some sort of access. And so then you have to think about it at basically a programmatic level. You have to have defined policies and defined acceptable use scenarios for BYOD, as well as scenarios where you can't use BYOD. So perhaps so I'd say at the most meta level, it's actually the impact of shelter in place has had a pronounced part of the storyline for how people think about BYOD.
So, but bring your own device. I mean, obviously, when you think about it, the first thing that comes to mind is if an employee, as you mentioned, brings his own smartphone or tablet. Now, during COVID-19, this was not the only implication, because all of a sudden people were not using the company's infrastructure in terms of using their Wi-Fi or their network, but they're using their home router. Basically, sometimes they're using their private laptop or things like that. Did that sort of change well, it surely changed the security, I can imagine, but did it change the whole setup of BYOD?
It does. In fact, it changes it a lot, because I think you brought up a really great example. Things like laptops. I'll actually share with you an example from one of our customers. Like they gave two interesting examples where laptops, now you'll see, I think in some regards, tablets and mobile phones were always part of the discussion when you thought about BYOD. But as you think about bringing your own computer or your personal laptop, it it becomes pronounced partially because imagine all these new people who are joining your company. When they join, there's no easy way to get people their computers. We had to shift into this mode. If you think about how quickly we had to shift, for the most part, depending on your region, we're talking about a shift that occurs maybe over a 1 week period, 2 week, 3 week period. So it's very, very quick. It's not as if you could have had 6 months to plan this out and think about how you make this shift. And so as you have new employees, how do you necessarily get them all their work laptops in time? Or the other use case is if your laptop breaks, in the past you could walk over to your help desk, IT help desk, or there's a way to walk to somebody to get help. Now it's not as easy. And so you're starting to see more and more personal laptops kind of come to the forefront. Now on the matter of folks kind of having to access everything through their home internet, I think it brings up a really great point. Like scale suddenly becomes a problem as well. Because before, as we think about security, you could assume everybody is in the office. So you can secure kind of the perimeter around the office in some regards. And there's enough people there that you can kind of envelop them in sort of, like some sort of perimeter. You can allow folks to kind of VPN in. Now all the traffic isn't actually seen by the company anymore. Like my traffic that I use with my computer, I can directly go to Office 365 or any app of choice and any destination of choice. I can just directly go to it. And so it suddenly becomes a big security gap for folks. And there are some companies that are trying things like, send all my traffic first back into the office via VPN or backhaul, and then, figure out my security over there, and then send it on to the destination. It's an architecture that works when, back to our earlier point, it's an architecture that works when it's the exception. But when everybody's doing it, eventually that infrastructure, that type of setup breaks, and you're not able to scale in that setup.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, because I think this also describes the conflict which companies have, because obviously, as you mentioned, when working from home, people can directly access any cloud app like Office 365. They don't need to go through VPN. If they do go through VPN, that also means that the company, if they want to route everyone through VPN, they need to increase the bandwidth. They need to increase the number of users they bought for VPN. It's sort of it's a conflict. So on the one hand, they do want to control the traffic, so they want to go over VPN, but on the other hand, they can't because they don't have the bandwidth. So they would like people to go to the cloud apps directly. How does that work? Or which one is better? Which one of the two choices would be better from a security perspective, if at all?
From a security perspective, it's the option where you allow folks, because the challenge at hand is how do you enable both productivity as well as security. And at the end of the day, trying to backhaul all of your traffic to the office is neither good for security nor productivity. From a productivity standpoint, eventually the performance is going to drain. I mean, whenever you add that much of that long of a leg to the way somebody travels, like, for me to have to send it, I'm lucky, I live close to the office, but imagine if you have to backhaul your traffic all the way across the country, and then from there, send it to your final destination. Eventually, your performance is going to go down. And so performance goes down, productivity goes down. And then from there, security is a fast follow. And so everything eventually breaks. The better model is to allow folks to directly access the source resources they need to access, and then secure those points of access. So as an example, if I, on my laptop, want to access Office 365, or if I want to access or interact through Slack, which has jumped in adoption the last 2 months naturally, I should allow a direct connection to that, but secure both the access to it, like who should access it from what device, and then on top of that, what they're doing inside of it. So are they trying to download information they're not supposed to download? Are they allowed to upload things? Where are they allowed to upload it from? Sometimes, to our point earlier about personal devices or work devices, like should I restrict people to access my most sensitive information only from the computers that were issued from the office, or do I feel comfortable enough letting folks use their personal computers to access, let's say, my healthcare records? And the answer is different for every single company. But the idea is, you really, if you want to have productivity or enable that productivity and performance, you'll need that direct connection. And then by nature of having that direct connection, it means that you need to secure the two bookends of that. One is the resource itself, the app itself. You got to secure that, and anybody and everybody who accesses it. And the other side is then you secure it on the device itself. And so if you've got both of those ends taken into account, then you can still enable that access and do it securely.
But how would that work from a technological point of view? How can you access to the cloud and then also on the device? I mean, just one thing which comes to my mind is with Android, for example, you probably have more options to enter some piece of software directly into the operating system, where iOS does not allow that. So how do you solve that issue, so to speak?
Yeah. It's a great question, and the way to do that is to secure the app. So in that case, let's just use a simple example. Like, let's say they're all trying to access Workday. Especially nowadays, everybody finds that some of your most sensitive information needs to be accessed from your HR systems directly. Now, if you have, in some regards, you're going to have a near, I shouldn't say infinite combination of devices that will try and access Workday, but the spectrum is going to be really broad. And so what you do is you set up controls in place for Workday, whether through something like a CASB or anything else, where by nature of any access or attempt to access Workday, that CASB can, you can set policies in there or a control point in there that says, well, before anybody from my company accesses Workday, either a specific group, a specific person, specific device, from specific locations are allowed to access Workday. And then from there, depending on some of those contextual factors, they're allowed to do X, Y, Z, like upload files, download files, manipulate files, what have you. So the control point, and it's the beauty of us talking about it as sort of like the dual component of control. In a scenario like that, like if you can control, I don't know if the hand motions help, but if you can control the app side of it, then you're in pretty good shape.
Okay. That's interesting. I've never thought of it like that, to be honest. But I mean, you mentioned that there's a different solution for every company. But in my experience, I think that at least younger people, they tend to be more not brand aware, but technology aware. If you see what I mean. Like what I'm trying to say actually is. A young people or a young student who just enters the job market, he or she might be used to using an iPhone, and they might be used to using a Mac. So they might be into the Apple world. But then if they go into the corporate world, all of a sudden they have to deal with Android phones and Windows PCs, and they say that alone would sort of decrease their productivity in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
How can companies at one point, on one hand, allow bring your own device policies, but on the other end, not compromising security. Is that the same with the control point? Is it the same sort of concept?
It is. It is. It is. So in a scenario like that, and it will vary depending on, you know, whether the company issues a PC, and let's say that person wants to use his or her Mac or something like that. It's not uncommon to see a scenario like that, right? And you see folks that just have a preference for a personal laptop and sometimes there's just better apps on some platforms than others. And so the idea is the same. You build that same kind of protection around the app, and depending on a scenario like that, for instance, I could say, you know, for person A gets access into this app regardless of what computer they're coming from. But maybe the one caveat I'll put in place is, but if you're going to download, we'll let you in. But if you're going to do something really sensitive like download personal information, that can only be done on the company issued computer. So, you know, it's a very small example where, yeah, I can go into Workday and I can access from any computer I want and do whatever I want on my Mac or my PC. But if you're going to do something that represents potential risk or exposure, like we can limit it to only, that action can only occur on the computer that we as a company have given you.
Okay. That's also very interesting, and I'm sure that's new to a lot of companies when they think about BYOD. But you know, back to the report a little bit more. So what are the security concerns from those organizations you talk to? What are the main points they're worried about?
I think there's you know, I think the main points initially were just about productivity. Like, how do I balance productivity with security? And in fact, maybe to the point earlier, when you have to make a shift so quickly, sometimes the early gut reaction is okay, let me just enable access for everything so that you know, everyone can continue to work as they were working before. I think now that as they get to the security question, now it becomes one, now with all these BYOD devices, like what are the policies that I should set? Like before, it was always these exceptions, and I look at them as one-offs. Like, how do I know which one should be allowed to access things? How do I control it? And then maybe the biggest question is, how do I maintain a consistent set of policies across all these different apps? Because, you know, from what we see from our vantage points, it's not uncommon for a user to access hundreds of different applications. So how do you the challenge is now, how do I consistently set policies, or how do I know how to control, like, for a given user of those 100 apps, whether they're allowed to go to it, what they're allowed to go access, and then what they're allowed to do once they get access. You know, I think those are all things that folks are and security teams are challenged with now. Just the combination, maybe the most broadest point is the combination of devices and the combination of applications has suddenly exploded. Like now it's like, well, it's my laptop issued from the computer, mobile phone, tablet, personal computer on one side. And then on the other side, it's like, it's not just the apps that I used to use. I now use 2 times as many apps as I used to, because now Slack is suddenly critical to the way that I operate. Like suddenly Microsoft Teams suddenly critical to the way that I operate. Zoom without question is now core to how you used to operate. So if you think about the mapping of all the different interactions between my devices and the apps that they access, where I'm accessing them from, the combination when you map them together is it's probably, I'm not a math major, but it's probably close to exponential.
I think that's also one of the reasons why a concept like SASE was sort of well, came about. I mean, it's I believe it's a term coined by Gardner,
It is.
and you know, it sort of describes, as you mentioned, different concepts sort of merged into one. And I see that also, or a similar development I see when you look at SIEM systems as opposed to vulnerability management. So in that area, people are looking more into what's actually happening than, you know, where are the vulnerabilities in my device or my server. Is that a general development you would see in security, that we're not looking at the different hardware and platforms anymore, but we're actually looking at where and how is the data flowing?
Actually, do you mind? You gave some analogies at the beginning and then broke up a little bit. Do you mind saying that first part again? Like I think you were saying SIM and
The SIEM, security information, and SIEM, depends. Some people just say SIEM, some say SIEM, but the security information event management, like Splunk, Curator, and ArcSight are sort of the biggest players there. But in general, what I'm comparing is that previously people were looking at the vulnerabilities of an application, of an operating system, of a network. And nowadays they're not looking at the vulnerabilities anymore, but they're looking at, you know, where's the data coming from? Is there data which is abnormal, which might be pointing to an attack? And SASE is, I think, similar, because you're not looking at the actual, you know, access anymore, but you're looking at, you know, may I access, can I access this? So it's more policy driven than actually access driven, so to speak.
Yeah, I think SASE brings up a really important point, and you know, I think that the main point with SASE, well, actually, there's several points with SASE, but I think, you know, implicit in SASE is that you need to somehow have a central control point for all of the different interactions that might be occurring, because that central control point that can see the way that your data flows across all those different combinations is going to require several different functions to come together in order to see, you know, like, am I going to a website? Am I going to a SaaS app that I provisioned? Am I going to, am I trying to go back to my home office? That layered against the different devices that I might have, both managed and unmanaged, really creates that number of combinations where you're right. Like, it does require lots of different feature sets to come together in order to be able to see all of those, and then be able to see the way that data is in fact interacting with and through the cloud.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe one more question, sort of as a closing question, because you know, that exponential growth in apps and in possibilities to access sensitive data also means that probably without machine learning and artificial intelligence, those central points will be hard to manage. And you know, I believe that this is actually a big technology which is probably be dominating the next 2 to 3 years. But I think it will also be dominating from the other side, so from the cyber criminals, which means that either they can access or hack artificial intelligences and machine learning software, which is one danger. And the other danger, obviously, is that they are developing their own artificial intelligence to counter what the security industry brings about. So how do you see that problem?
You know, I tend to have, I actually tend to think the attackers will go, you know, I actually think what's going to happen, or if not, if it hasn't already happened, because we do talk an awful lot about attackers getting more and more sophisticated, and they're getting smarter. They're using more interesting tools. But I think the one thing that attackers will always be is opportunistic. And I think during this period, they're going to discover that there are new opportunities for them that are really easy wins. And there's going to be the bar for how you compromise and then potentially breach a company is going to become much lower. Like in fact, much of what we've talked about today probably doesn't even have to span to AI or machine learning. Like a lot of those topics are designed for the most sophisticated attacks in the world. For instance, if I think about the couple of things that we've talked about, suddenly you'll have access control where security teams in an effort, or IT teams in an effort to give access to everybody, creates really broad policies. And so, the front door into any of your apps is suddenly really wide. Or I'm bringing in devices that are really broad, or I'm bringing in BYOD devices, and rather than properly secure them, I suddenly give access to everybody in an effort to continue to allow productivity. Or just phishing attacks, like manipulating human behavior will become much easier during this period because everything is unknown. So I actually think during this period, the number of easy wins and kind of gaps that will have presented themselves will be things that attackers will eventually look to exploit, because you might as well go the easy route rather than try and the reason people get more sophisticated is because the bar has raised. I think during this period, in some regards, new gaps have opened that people will opportunistically go after.
Yeah, that's definitely something we have seen in other articles and things we featured. But yeah, thanks, Kevin. That was a very interesting interview, I believe, and yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking with you again. Maybe on is there going to be a next report next year?
Yes, we do plan on subsequent. I don't know. We've not decided on the exact timing yet, but we will have subsequent reports as well.
That's good. That's be definitely interesting to hear how the results will differ in a hopefully post-COVID-19 world as opposed to a world in crisis. Thanks again. Have a nice day, and looking forward to speaking with you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for your time. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thanks.